Hello and welcome to the Best of Citizens Hour on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM. I am Veronique Ndai. In this edition, we revisit one of our recent discussions on a critical issue facing West Africa and the Sahel, the lack of basic social services and its implication for democracy and governance. Well, in Benin, access to basic social services remains a major concern for many citizens despite years of reforms and social intervention programs introduced by authorities in Porto Novo. However, civil society groups say major gaps still remain in ensuring equal access to essential services for all citizens. Here is a report by Pulsheri Bemeno from Radio Weke, one of our partner radio stations in Porto Novo, voiced by Atieri Mbila.
Parliamentary correspondent Mashiala Goliagbo says that despite efforts by authorities, many vulnerable communities in Benin still face difficulties accessing quality healthcare, education, and other essential social services.
The National Service Protection Strategies for 2024 to 2028 have been adopted, with a focus on improving incomes, access to social services, crisis resilience, and coordination of social protection system. Despite this progress, a large portion of the population remains inadequately covered, particularly in terms of health insurance and social security, and most workers in the informal sector are still poorly protected.
Civil society groups argue that improving access to basic social services is essential not only for improving living conditions but also for strengthening democracy and restoring public confidence in state institutions. Jijoho Eugene Agwemon, president of the Network of Civil Society Organizations for the Promotion of Social and Financial Education in Benin, notes that authorities must intensify efforts to make social services more accessible and inclusive.
Basic social services, including healthcare, education, environmental protection, sanitation, clean water and security, form the foundation of democracy and ensure equal opportunities and the meaningful exercise of citizenship. After all, an individual marginalized by poverty or illness cannot fully participate in democratic life. Hence, the importance of basic social services in supporting the success of democracy.
Political leaders also continue to stress the importance of improving social services as part of efforts to consolidate democracy and improve national development. Politician Ibrahim Baba Agba says access to basic services remains at the heart of democratic governance.
The first thing I need to do is listen to my constituents. And while launching a transparent citizen audit of social services, since I can't improve what I don't measure with my constituents, I have to listen to them. There's a whole issue here, but knowing what's most important is part of this process. I say we absolutely must listen to them and figure out what needs to be done. We have to tackle things step by step. For me, what is most important? Providing drinking water to the people. Water is the source of life. I must ensure that in every district, residents have access to drinking water. Water is life. After water, I believe I must make an effort to combat insecurity while providing electricity. Electricity in this sense to promote the expansion of the power grid. It is the government that provides the medicines. It is the government that appoints the staff and the doctors. But I will make sure to keep an eye on this so that in every district, when citizens fall ill, they have doctors on site to care for them.
Alright, that was a report. In Benin, obviously, the questions regarding access to basic social services is a strong one across the continent. But then, several years after the Gambia's democratic transition, many citizens continue to face economic hardship, unemployment, and rising cost of living, with some young people still taking the dangerous risks to search for greater opportunities in Europe. Our correspondent in the Gambia, Sang Donald Mendy, filed this report.
Nearly a decade after the Gambia's political transition, many citizens say democratic freedoms have significantly expanded. People now speak more openly.
Talking with the peace, security and stability of this country, we are ready for them. We never succumb, and we are ready to put our lives for the land, to die for Gambia.
independent media enjoys greater space.
Media has taken advantage of the opportunities provided by the political change we've got since 2017 or 2016.
And political debate is no longer carried out in whispers as it once was under authoritarian rule.
Corruption has become a religion in this country. Corruption has become everyday life for public servants in this country. Corruption has become bread and butter for public officials.
But while many acknowledge progress in civil liberties, economic hardship is emerging as a growing concern for ordinary Gambians. As the cost of living continues to rise, some increasingly view migration as their only chance for a better life, despite the risks involved. Across the country, families are still searching for relatives who disappeared during the journey, while others continue to mourn loved ones who never made it home. Among them is Mariama Jane, whose brother Falalo left the Gambia nearly 3 years ago.
We hope since they are not confirmed deaths, there must be a hope. Secondly, also, they can be gone without any notification of anywhere. So we believe there is hope. They might be somewhere captured or in anywhere around.
Despite increased awareness campaigns and repeated reports of deadly sea crossings, many young Africans continue to risk dangerous migration routes in pursuit of economic opportunities overseas.
To be rich in this country or to have something to show for, you need to work with NGO or government parastatals.
On the government side, they have failed woefully because creating the enabling environment for young people to thrive in this country is something that is the core mandate of the government.
Many Gambians feel excluded from opportunities, especially youths. Now the job being created are either not sustainable as well.
Human rights defender Madi Jobate says democracy must not only guarantee freedoms but also respond to everyday realities faced by citizens.
Men and women die in the Sahara Desert or in the Atlantic Ocean or the Mediterranean. It's as a result of the fact that public institutions and officials are not performing their functions as required by the law. So law enforcement is not merely protecting rights, preventing the violation of rights, but rights are also about goods and services.
Meanwhile, many Gambians say that while political freedoms have improved since the end of Jammeh's rule, daily economic struggles continue to overshadow those gains.
All right, that was a report from the Gambia by our correspondent, Sang Donald Mendy. But now we head to Nigeria, and for many people in the country, access to basic social services like electricity, clean water, healthcare and employment remains a daily struggle despite years of democratic governance, as citizens increasingly turn to self-help solutions such as solar power systems and private boreholes. Questions are growing about accountability, public trust and the true impact of governance on daily lives. In this report, our correspondent Yechenu Sasitu examines how the failure of basic social services is shaping public perception of democracy in Nigeria.
The sound of generators has become part of everyday life for the average Nigerian. In homes, shops and offices, the struggle for electricity, jobs and affordable living continues to shape how millions experience democracy beyond election seasons. Sisi is an Abuja resident who says the past week has been especially difficult. For 7 straight days, there was no electricity supply in her area.
I work from home most of the time, so I need electricity to stay productive. No lights to pump the water. My food keeps spoiling. Running generator and buying fuel is very expensive and it has become very difficult to cope. And I'm tired.
Across Nigeria and parts of West Africa, frustrations over poor electricity supply, unemployment, and the rising cost of living are fueling broader conversations about governance and accountability. As public services continue to fail many households, more Nigerians are turning to self-help solutions. Solar installations are becoming increasingly common as families and businesses search for alternatives to unreliable electricity supply. Many households are also drilling private boreholes to secure regular access to water, often at significant personal cost. Florence and Victor are both undergraduates at the University of Abuja.
My biggest struggle is trying to survive with the high cost of things. Poor electricity, because that's what I'm even facing.
To actually get maybe a skill that will actually help me financially, because country as we have it is not smiling. It also affects me emotionally.
Economist Ola Oladele says the economic realities may not get better anytime soon.
We've just established that the economic pressure is real and we can't escape that. But the thing is that personal finance is personal. So whilst the economy is doing its thing that you can't control, the question is, what adjustments are you making to your tastes and your lifestyle to actually reflect the general direction of the economy?
For governance experts, the implications go beyond economics. Public affairs analyst Kunle Adeni says democracy cannot thrive where citizens consistently lack access to basic social services.
When you look at it, in a situation where people live in communities and they don't have access to quality education, people live in communities where they do not have access to the right healthcare infrastructure, of course, what does that tell you? It tells you that you are failing in delivering the purpose of democracy, which the people fought for, which the people struggled for.
Kingsley Ngene is barely a year in marriage. His hope is to give his wife a good life.
I know it's their duty to do it for me, but I've learned to do it on my own because over the last 3 years, I've been robbed like twice. They failed me in security, so I've been forced to provide that for myself. And the same thing applies to power and water too. So yes, I do not think I'm enjoying these amenities.
Remember Florence and Victor? They want a system where governance is reflected in practical improvements to daily life, at least to enable them complete their studies.
Because if their focus is on our needs, I don't think we will be suffering. We all want a government that listens, that keeps to their promise and not just say it.
So it's not just about being president or we electing you as the president. Are you doing your duty as the president of Nigeria? Or you being a governor of a particular state? Are you meeting up with the needs?
It is election season in Nigeria, and as usual, promises will be made during campaigns. But analysts say restoring trust in democracy will require more than political promises.
Until governance gets to the point where people do not have to beg for their leaders to construct roads for them to live a good lifestyle, people do not have to beg for them to get good health care, then you can say that democracy is really working. But where these basic amenities are not available, then of course you know that you are walking a thin line of democracy surviving and of course democracy losing its essence.
Across Nigeria and the wider West African region, the debate around democracy is increasingly moving beyond elections and political rhetoric to something more immediate, whether governments can deliver the basic services citizens need to live with dignity.
People power, our power.
Because for many Nigerians, democracy is no longer judged only by the right to vote, but by the ability to switch on a light, confidently open tap for water, access healthcare, find decent work, and build a stable future. For WADR, Yechenu Sasetu in Abuja.
All right, that was a report by our correspondent in Nigeria, Yechenu Sasetu. Now let's focus on the Sahel. In Mali, basic social infrastructure plays a vital role in the functioning of democracy and in fostering closer ties between the state and its citizens. But in many parts of the country, insecurity and attacks by armed terrorist groups are undermining this infrastructure and further complicating the operations of public service. Details with our correspondent in Bamako, Aluchan by Imo Edit.
For many observers, democracy is not limited to elections or institutions. It also depends on people's access to essential services. In the Sikaso region, this education professional emphasizes that when these infrastructures are no longer accessible, it is the people who bear the direct consequences.
The consequences are severe because attacks on key infrastructure disrupt communication and isolate communities from one another. But beyond that, under international humanitarian law, hospitals are protected facilities and should never be targeted or set on fire. Attacking a hospital destroys already fragile healthcare systems and leaves civilians with nowhere to seek medical care in times of crisis. Where are they supposed to go?
To date, Mali has numerous social infrastructures in major cities, schools, hospitals, public housing, places of worship, markets and other public facilities. However, in remote areas, this remains a major concern. For this local elected official, the government must make efforts in this regard, as the lack of these basic social infrastructures reduces the government's presence among citizens.
This is terrorism. When they come, they directly target communities and infrastructure. They prevent children from going to school and close down classrooms. Often they even demolish places of worship. We saw what happened in Timbuktu. Health centers are not spread either, leaving vulnerable populations without access to medical care and deepening fear and hopelessness among civilians. Of course, the population will lose hope. Today, thank God, the government is providing the infrastructure.
According to Masire Diop, a security expert, attacks on social infrastructure are now a strategy used by armed groups to permanently weaken the state in certain areas.
These practices didn't just start today, because all of this is part of the strategies of war. What is the point of using, destroying, or sabotaging infrastructure that is primarily intended for civilian use? These are very unfortunate acts, but they are part of war. Now, the government simply needs to be much more vigilant.
In light of this situation, several observers are calling for a stronger state presence and improved security for basic social services in order to preserve public trust in the state and support efforts to restore stability in areas affected by insecurity.
A report by our Bamako correspondent Ali Cham and voiced by Imo Edit. Now we head to Burkina Faso, and access to basic social services remains a major concern, especially in the provinces. People sometimes travel for miles to seek medical care, obtain drinking water or access education. Our correspondent in Burkina Faso, Martin Kabar, tells us more in this report voiced by Deborah Amuwo.
Razmane Bari is a human rights advocate in northern Burkina Faso. For several years, the civil society activist has observed difficulties in people's access to basic social services.
If you visit the emergency room at the Ouagadougou hospital, they have no choice but to admit everyone. When you go to the clinical support services in Ouagadougou too, it is packed. They have no choice but to admit everyone. They do this because there are no other clinical support service facilities elsewhere. Also, the schools are overwhelmed in Ouagadougou. Due to the situation, they even set up makeshift shelters to house the children because there aren't enough schools elsewhere. You can only find them in Ouagadougou. Aside from Ouagadougou, you have to go to Gorsi or continue on to Yako.
The North is not alone in facing the situation. Nationally, according to figures from Doctors Without Borders, the estimated health coverage rate is less than 65%, and the situation has deteriorated further with the worsening security crisis.
We no longer talk about basic social services because there are no schools, no health centers. The water sources have been destroyed and there are practically no services. Only a few residents remain, and even that is limited to a handful of communities. For example, if you look at the entire commune of Windigui, there is no one there. In Novintun, in the village, there is no one in that commune, for instance. So we can't really talk about basic social services when you look around Wayugwa. There are areas where people can't even go to fetch water anymore because they are afraid of being attacked.
Faced with this reality, the authorities are developing initiatives to alleviate the suffering of the people. In 2025, for example, the Ministry of Health launched mobile clinics distributed across all regions of the country. Health Minister Robert Lucien Kagougou.
The goal is to ensure that even people living in our villages have access to these healthcare services. I would like to mention, for example, vaccination campaigns, malnutrition screening, and prenatal care. We also offer much more specialized services. The mobile clinic enables the screening for precancerous lesions of the cervix and the on-site treatment of these precancerous lesions. The mobile clinic also provides mobile mammographic services.
In another initiative in April, the Ministry of National Solidarity launched the Mobile Social Service, which aims to bring citizens closer to social services through motorized agents.
That was a report by Martin Kaba in Burkina Faso, presented by Deborah Amuwo. Before we conclude today's edition, we turn to our fact-checking segment with Francis Boniface.
Across the Sahel and West Africa, many governments continue to struggle to provide basic services such as education, healthcare, security, jobs and infrastructure. For many citizens, democracy is increasingly being judged not by elections alone, but by whether government can improve everyday life. As insecurity spreads across parts of the Sahel and its fringes, questions are growing about whether weak service delivery is helping fuel instability, erode public trust, and threaten peaceful coexistence. This week on InfoCheck, we examine the connection between poor social services, insecurity, and declining confidence in democratic institutions. Few cities in the region illustrate this phenomenon more clearly than Maiduguri, the capital of Nigeria's Borno state, and for years the epicenter of the Boko Haram insurgency. There we spoke with economist and lecturer at the University of Maiduguri, Dr. Jida Mohamed Abdelaziz Ajayi, who says years of insecurity have devastated economic activity, destroyed livelihoods, and pushed many families into hardship.
Naturally, it has negatively affected the economic status, not only Borno, but as you said earlier, the Northeast. Almost every nook and cranny in Borno state has been affected. You know, at a point, only about 5 local governments were not under security threat or security challenge. So most of these local governments, there was virtually no economic activity because of the insurgency. So all programs, all developmental strides or agendas could not be executed, has been disrupted because of the violence.
When governments struggle to deliver services and address insecurity, public frustration often extends beyond the executive branch to democratic institutions themselves. Former Senegalese parliamentarian Dr. Ibrahim Sani says many citizens have lost confidence in institutions they believe are failing to hold governments accountable.
I was a parliamentarian about 15 years ago, and what happened at the time was very simple. We had 8 people who had never sat in a school. They couldn't read the law we were voting in. At that time in Niger, you couldn't be a parliamentarian. Not the case in most African countries. You can go to parliament, get voted in, and yet you cannot read the laws you're voting on, and so you just vote because people tell you to vote. Simply, your party tells you to vote or the government tells you to vote. Is that democracy? We need a critical mass of informed people on the issues that are being voted on.
Experts argue that rebuilding trust requires more than promises or political rhetoric. Citizens need to see visible improvements in their daily lives alongside transparency and accountability in the management of public resources. Dr. Ajayi believes that restoring confidence begins with ensuring that citizens are informed about what governments are doing and are able to see measurable results.
And in the interest of transparency and accountability, people need to know what has been done so far to assuage the fears of the people. I live in Maiduguri. I don't know anything about it. What more about somebody who is living on the outskirts of Maiduguri? So there should be information what is being done, and people need to see tangible things being done. I'm not saying the government is not doing anything, but I think they need to do more. More can be done.
The experiences of communities across the Sahel suggest that security, development, and democracy are deeply interconnected. Where citizens lack access to education, jobs, healthcare, infrastructure, and security, frustration can grow, trust in institutions can decline, and social cohesion can weaken. The result can be a cycle in which weak services contribute to insecurity. Insecurity undermines development, and both erode confidence in democratic governance. While elections remain an important pillar of democracy, many experts argue that democratic legitimacy ultimately depends on whether government can deliver meaningful improvement in people's daily lives. I am Francis Boniface, and this has been InfoCheck.
All right. right, thank you, Francis Boniface, for the Info Check segment. Now, today's discussion reminds us that democracy is not just measured by election or political transitions. For many citizens, democracy is also about whether governments can provide healthcare, education, electricity, water, security, and dignity. Thank you for listening to Citizens Are the Net edition on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM. I am Veronique Njai. Stay informed, stay engaged.